Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that digs into a whole stack of sources on a topic and really tries to pull out the key insights for you.
Giving you that shortcut to getting up to speed.
Exactly. And
Rawr.
today we're stepping onto the virtual front lines. Imagine, if you can, not just reading about World War I, but feeling it. The chaos, the brutality, all through a video game.
It's a really fascinating premise, isn't it? How do you take one of humanity's most devastating conflicts and turn it into something engaging, something award-winning?
And do it respectfully, right?
Yeah.
While navigating all those complex ethical questions about representing history.
Yeah, the whole tightrope walk of historical representation in entertainment. It's tricky.
So today we're doing a deep dive into Battlefield 1. This is the 2016 first-person shooter from Dicey, the Swedish developers, published by EA.
Right, the 15th game in the series. But this one felt different, a real departure.
Totally. So we're going to explore how it came about, this audacious idea, look at the gameplay that got so much acclaim, and, unpack those big questions it raised about history in games.
And our mission here, for you listening, is really to figure out how Dicey managed to create this huge curiosity around a war that, let's be honest, popular culture often overlooks or simplifies.
Yeah, how do they build that tension? Use those narratives, the multiplayer, to raise the stakes for players and maybe even for the whole gaming industry.
It's all about that delicate balance, isn't it, between historical weight, that gravitas, and just pure entertainment value. Where do you draw the line?
Get ready for a pretty meaningful conversation, I think. We got a great stack of sources to guide us, critical reviews, developer interviews, insights into their thinking.
Community discussions too, especially around historical accuracy, which is always a hot topic. And even a detailed look at the sound design, which was apparently phenomenal.
Oh yeah, award-winning stuff. So it's quite a journey ahead. Let's dive in. Okay, so first big point, the bold leap. Why WWI? I mean, looking back at 2016, choosing World War I, that felt like a massive gamble, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. A huge gamble. The trend, especially for the big shooters like Call of Duty, was all about futuristic warfare, sci-fi settings, advanced tech.
Right, jetpacks and laser guns.
Exactly. So for DICE to suddenly pivot, to go back a century to the mud and trenches of the Great War, it was, well, audacious is the right word.
But it wasn't just a whim, was it? There was history behind this idea within DICE.
No, not at all. Lars Gustafsson, the creative director, he actually revealed that doing a World War I game had been a kind of dream concept for the team for ages.
Really? A long-term thing?
Yeah. He saw WWI as the dawn of all-out war. The birthplace of modern combined arms, combat tanks, planes, massive infantry clashes.
So a natural fit for the battlefield formula in their eyes. Land, sea, air combat.
Precisely. It mapped surprisingly well onto their core gameplay pillars, even though it seemed counterintuitive to many at first.
But just because the creative team germed it didn't mean the higher-ups were sold immediately, right? I heard there was some significant pushback from EA.
Oh, definitely. That's a fascinating piece of the story. Patrick Soderlund, who was a top executive at EA then, he initially rejected the pitch flat out.
Rejected it? Why?
His reasoning was, apparently, that he believed a World War I shooter would not be fun to play.
Wow. Not fun. That says a lot about the perception of WWI, doesn't it? Too grim, too static, maybe?
Exactly. That perception that the war was just stagnant trenches and misery was really strong. The idea of translating that into an engaging, fast-paced shooter seemed almost contradictory to some decision makers.
So how did DICE turn it around? How did they convince him?
It took a demo. Dicey went away, built a compelling prototype that showcased their vision, how the tech, the vehicles, the atmosphere could work. They had to show him it could be fun, that it could capture that battlefield feeling within that historical context.
That moment must have been pretty high stakes for the development team.
You have to imagine pitching your dream project and getting shot down, then having to build something concrete to prove its worth. It really highlights that tension between creative vision and the commercial realities or perceived risks from a publisher's perspective.
And when they finally got the green light, that decision alone, just choosing WWI, immediately created this huge buzz. It felt so different.
Instantly, it cut through the noise of all the futuristic shooters. People were intrigued, curious. How would they make this work? It tapped into something players didn't even know they wanted, perhaps.
And it wasn't just the setting choice. Their approach to research seems really interesting, too. They weren't just looking at grainy black and white photos.
Right. Alexander Grundall, the senior producer, he talked about deliberately seeking out colored images of the war. Things like the documentary Apocalypse, World War I, or the book World War I in color.
Why color specifically?
He felt it made the past feel much closer, less abstract. Seeing the uniforms, the landscapes, the people in color helped them visualize the soldiers' experiences more immediately, helped them imagine translating that lived reality into the game. It was about bridging that historical distance.
That's a really smart insight. Using color to create empathy almost, to make it feel less like a dusty history lesson.
Exactly. And the inspiration wasn't just visual. Grendel also mentioned Dan Carlin's hardcore history podcast, The Blueprint for Armageddon series, as a big inspiration.
Ah, okay. So they were digging into the narrative, the context, the sheer scale of the human drama too.
Absolutely. It shows a desire for deeper historical immersion beyond just the aesthetics. They wanted to understand the why and how of the conflict, not just the what.
And this fed into their core design philosophy, right? That WWI was this crucible of innovation.
Yeah, they really leaned into that idea of WWI being a time in which weapons were invented out of necessity. You had bolt-action rifles alongside flamethrowers, poison gas, early tanks, biplanes, massive dreadnoughts.
A real technological melting pot.
Exactly, and they saw that variety as perfect for gameplay. Different tools for different situations, for different player styles. It wasn't just about historical accuracy in terms of loadouts. It was about leveraging the historical context of rapid, desperate innovation to create diverse mechanics.
Using history as a toolbox for game design, essentially.
Kind of, yeah. And all of this, the bold setting, the deep research, the design philosophy, it all built up this incredible pre-release anticipation.
You mentioned the reveal trailer earlier. That thing went viral, didn't it?
Oh, massively. By May 2016, it was the most liked trailer on YouTube ever at that point. Over 2 million likes. That's not just hype, that's a signal of genuine widespread excitement.
It clearly struck a chord. People were ready for something different.
It really seemed like it. A pent-up demand for historical settings maybe, or just fatigue with the endless sci-fi cycle, whatever it was. Daisuke tapped into it.
But with that excitement, surely there were concerns too. You can't just make a game about WWI without raising some eyebrows.
Oh, for sure. The sensitivity of the subject matter meant there was immediate discussion and some skepticism. Critics like Julie Muncie at Wired voiced concerns. Could a fast-paced shooter truly capture the complex situations and the horror and futility of WWI? Was it even an ideal setting?
A valid question. How do you balance entertainment with the sheer human cost?
Exactly. But then you had others, like Robert Rath at ZAM, suggesting it could actually be a good thing, that it might rejuvenate popular interest in the war, make it accessible to a new audience.
So, a debate right from the start.
Yeah.
Could it educate, or would it trivialize?
Pretty much. And Alex Hearn at The Guardian even threw another angle in, questioning the hypocrisy of singling out WWI. He asked, basically, why do we deem any war an appropriate topic for this kind of game, if not others?
That's a tough question, too. Where are the lines drawn?
It set the stage perfectly. All this buzz, this debate, this curiosity, it put a lot of eyes on DICE to see how they'd actually handle it in the game itself.
It certainly got my attention back then. And for you listening, think about it. Did that unexpected setting choice immediately make you curious, wondering how they'd tackle such a heavy, often oversimplified period? It definitely created anticipation, which only intensified when we started seeing how they handled the single-player campaign, the war stories.
Right, and this is where Battlefield 1 really tried to inject that human element to build some emotional resonance and maybe encourage a bit more reflection from the player.
How did they structure it? It wasn't typical campaign, was it?
No, definitely not. Instead of one long story following a single hero, they opted for an anthology format. 6 separate war stories, each focusing on a different allied soldier, a different nationality, a different front of the war.
An anthology. That's interesting. Why that approach?
Well, the designers said they wanted to bring more Battlefield into the campaign experience. That meant more variety, different locations, different roles, more vehicle gameplay, more player choice within these larger environments.
Okay, so integrating the multiplayer feel into the single player.
Exactly, but it was also about narrative. They wanted to tell the story of several different people and how they react to the world changing around them. Less one-man army, more individual perspectives caught up in this massive world-altering event.
Tried to capture different facets of the war through different eyes.
Precisely. And that approach, I think, helped avoid some of the usual shooter tropes and allowed for more focused, maybe more poignant storytelling in each segment.
And they set that poignant tone right from the very beginning, didn't they? That opening prologue, Storm of Steel. It's pretty unforgettable.
Oh, Absolutely unforgettable. It immediately throws you into the chaos. You're playing as different members of the American Harlem Hellfighters during a massive German offensive in France, 1918.
And the core mechanic of it is brutal.
It really is. When your soldier dies, and you will die, the screen fades to black, shows the soldier's name, their dates of birth and death, and then you just jump into the body of another soldier nearby.
Instantly highlighting the scale of losses. Just one soldier after another.
It's incredibly effective at conveying the sheer meat grinder aspect of the war, the futility for the individual soldier caught in this massive machine. There's this unnamed narrator whose commentary overlays the action, talking about the nature of the war, adding this really somber, reflective layer.
And how does it end?
It culminates in the standoff between your final soldier and a lone German soldier. Both are exhausted, covered in mud, weapons raised, and then they just lower them. A sort of silent acknowledgement of the shared horror, maybe. It powerfully sets a very respectful and somber tone right from the start.
Wow, that's a bold way to open a mainstream shooter. No heroic charge, just exhaustion and a flicker of shared humanity. It definitely prepares you for stories that might not have simple, triumphant endings.
Absolutely. It primes the player to expect something a bit more nuanced, perhaps a bit more tragic, than your typical war game narrative.
So after that powerful opening, we get into the individual war stories. Let's touch on those. First up, Through Mud and Blood. Tanks, right?
Yeah, this one puts you in the boots of Daniel Edwards, a rookie British tank driver, formerly a chauffeur, commanding a Mark V tank nicknamed Black Bess. It's set during the Battle of Cambrai in late 1918.
What's the focus here? The experience of tank warfare.
Very much so. It explores the claustrophobia, the mechanical unreliability of these early tanks, the dynamics within the small crew, the sacrifices they have to make. You really feel the struggle of operating this metal beast through the mud and chaos.
Sounds intense. But I remember this one drew some criticism for accuracy.
It did. The main point was historical records show it was predominantly Canadian forces, not the British depicted, who pushed into Cambrai during that specific operation. So a clear example of DICE taking some artistic license with the historical details, likely for narrative purposes.
Okay, an early sign of that gameplay versus accuracy tension. Moving from tanks to the skies. Friends in high places.
This one follows Clyde Blackburn, who's portrayed as this sort of roguish American pilot, a gambler, maybe not entirely trustworthy. It's set during the aerial battles of spring 1917.
What makes this one stand out?
The key thing here is the unreliable narrator aspect. Blackburn's telling the story, and it becomes clear he might be embellishing things, or maybe outright lying about his exploits.
Ah, so you're not sure if what you're playing actually happened that way.
Exactly. It adds this interesting meta-commentary layer. You're playing through these spectacular dogfights and daring escapes, but you're constantly questioning the narrative itself. It subtly makes you think about how war stories get told and maybe distorted over time.
That's a clever twist. Okay, next, down to the Italian Alps with Avanti Savoia.
Right. This one is set high in the Dolomites in 1918. You play as Luca Vincenzo Cucciola, an Italian soldier in the elite Arditi shock troops. He's part of a desperate assault to capture an Austro-Hungarian fortress.
What's the emotional core of this story?
It's framed as a memory. An aged Luca is recounting the events to his daughter years later. There's this deep sense of mourning, of loss. He talks about his brother lost in the fighting and reflects on his entire generation, calling them the lost generation.
So it really emphasizes the long-term scars of the war, the personal cost.
Very much so. It's less about the action itself and more about the enduring weight of memory and grief. Really quite poignant.
Sounds like it. Then we head to Gallipoli for the runner.
Yeah, this one takes place during the infamous Gallipoli campaign in 1915. You play as Frederick Bishop, an Australian messenger, a runner for the ANZIC forces.
Gallipoli. That was brutal. What themes does this story explore?
It really focuses on the brutal reality of that campaign, the amphibious landings, the beach assaults, the horrific casualties. There's a strong theme of lost innocence, too, particularly through the character of Jack Foster, a young soldier under Bishop's mentorship.
So the contrast between the initial sort of maybe naive view of war and the grim reality.
Exactly. It shows the carnage, the sacrifice, and it doesn't shy away from the fact that ultimately the campaign was a costly failure for the Allies, though it became a foundational moment for Australian and New Zealand national identity, Anzac Day.
Right. The historical context is important there. And finally, Nothing is Written, which takes us to a very different theater of war.
Completely different. This is set in the Arabian Desert in 1918. You play as Zara Gufran, a Bedouin woman fighting as a rebel alongside T.E. Lawrence of Arabia himself.
Lawrence of Arabia. Okay. So guerrilla warfare.
Yes, it focuses on disrupting the Ottoman war effort. You're involved in espionage, sabotage, using the desert environment tactically against the technologically superior Ottoman railway. It highlights the Arab revolt and their fight for autonomy.
Does it touch on the aftermath, the political side?
It does, and quite pointedly. The story concludes with a note explaining that despite their crucial role and promises made, the Allies ultimately denied full autonomy to the Arab nations after the war, leading to, ongoing conflicts and instability in the region that persist even today.
So it connects the WWI era events directly to modern consequences. That's quite impactful.
It really adds another layer of historical weight, showing that the war's end wasn't really the end for everyone involved.
These war stories sound like much more than just typical shooter missions. They seem like genuine attempts to convey different aspects of the human cost of the war.
I think that was the goal. Critics praise the single player for capturing these intense moments of spectacle alongside quieter moments of exposition. It was seen as conveying the desperation, death, and destruction of the First World War in a way no shooter has before it.
And beyond the narrative impact, they served a gameplay purpose too, right? Kind of sneaky tutorials.
Yeah, that was quite clever. Each war story introduces you to different mechanics you'll need in multiplayer, but within the context of the narrative. You learn to pilot a plane in friends in high places, command a tank in Through Mud and Blood, use stealth in Nothing is Written.
So by the time you finish the campaign, you're sort of primed for the multiplayer without having sat through boring tutorial screens.
Exactly. It's a really elegant way to blend narrative, immersion, and player onboarding. Quite well done.
So thinking about these diverse stories, for you listening, which one resonates the most? Did experiencing the war through these different lenses, the tanker, the pilot, the runner, the rebel, deepen your understanding? Or maybe serve some empathy? These personal snapshots really set the stage for the sheer scale we see in the multiplayer.
And if the war stories were about individual perspectives, the multiplayer is where Dicey unleashed the full dawn of all-out war experience. We're talking massive scale.
How massive? What was the scope?
Up to 64 players battling it out on these huge, sprawling maps. The whole design philosophy was geared towards creating a continually changing battlefield where you constantly had to adapt.
And the tools of war were all there, right?
Oh yeah, a huge arsenal of WWI weaponry, bolt-action rifles, early machine guns, flamethrowers, even melee weapons like sabers and trench clubs. Something for every playstyle.
Plus the vehicles.
The vehicles were key. Light tanks, heavy tanks, biplanes doing dogfights overhead, armored cars, torpedo boats. And then the really big stuff. Armored trains, colossal dreadnought battleships shelling the coast, and even giant zeppelins looming over the battlefield. You could even ride horses.
Horses in a modern shooter. That must have felt different. The sheer variety sounds incredible. Land, sea, air, cavalry, all clashing together.
It really captured that sense of a world transitioning into mechanized warfare, but still having elements of the old ways. It felt chaotic, dynamic, and just huge.
And they introduced some really innovative multiplayer modes to harness that scale, didn't they? Operations mode stands out.
Operations was arguably the crown jewel of the multiplayer. It was widely praised, called 2016's best multiplayer mode by some. It wasn't just a single match, it was designed to feel like a whole campaign from the war.
How did it work?
It took place across multiple maps, sequentially. One team attacks, trying to capture sectors, while the other defends. If the attackers succeed on one map, the battle moves to the next map in the operation. It blended elements of conquest, capturing flags, and rush, pushing objectives, into this larger narrative structure.
So it had a real sense of momentum, of pushing the front line.
Exactly. And the tension was high because attackers had limited respawn tickets called battalions. Failing to capture a sector meant losing a battalion. Lose all your battalions, and the operation ends for the attackers.
Sounds intense. Battles could last a long time then.
Oh yeah, operations matches could easily last an hour or more. Epic struggles back and forth across multiple landscapes. And to keep things interesting, they introduced the behemoths.
Ah, yes. The giant vehicles. How did they fit into operations?
They were a comeback mechanic, basically. If a team was losing badly, say, the attackers were struggling, or the defenders were getting pushed back too easily, they'd get access to a behemoth.
Like the Zeppelin or the armored train.
Exactly. Or the dreadnought on coastal maps. These things are incredibly powerful, bristling with guns, and could seriously even the odds, as the developers put it. Suddenly, the losing team has this massive asset that can rain down destruction and turn the tide.
That must have created some incredible moments. Just when you think you've won, a giant airship appears.
Absolutely. It added this amazing dynamic element, these huge power shifts that made matches unpredictable and consistently exciting right to the end. Really raised the stakes.
Beyond operations, there's another mode that caught people's attention for being, well, a bit weird, right? War Pigeon.
War pigeons. Yeah, that one was definitely unique. It was described as a sort of capture the flag variant, but with a pigeon.
Pigeon, seriously.
Seriously, a messenger pigeon spawns somewhere on the map. Both teams race to capture it. Once you have the pigeon, you have to hold on to it for a period while a message is written, then find a safe spot to release it. If you succeed, your team gets an artillery strike on the eagle.
That sounds hilariously frantic. Fighting over a bird.
It was. The developers admitted it was a ludicrous concept, apparently based on some even more comical real-life WWI incidents. But it worked as a game mode. It was a fun, chaotic shake-up to the standard deathmatch, forcing teams to work together around this very specific, very mobile objective. Created a lot of curiosity just by its premise.
I love that. Sometimes the weirdest ideas make for the best gameplay, and they still had the classic modes too.
Oh, yes. Conquest, the traditional flag capture mode, was there. Domination, a smaller infantry-focused version of Conquest. Rush, where attackers have to destroy telegraph posts. And standard team deathmatch, all adapted for the WWI setting and weapons.
And they kept adding things through DLC, didn't they?
They did. The expansions brought new modes. They Shall Not Pass, the French Army DLC, added Frontlines, which was this intense tug-of-war mode, fighting over a single line of objectives. In the Name of the Tsar, the Russian DLC brought Supply Drop, where teams fight over airdropped crates, and Apocalypse added Air Assault, which was pure aerial combat, just plains dogfighting.
So the multiplayer experience kept evolving, kept things fresh.
Definitely. They did a good job of supporting the game post-launch with meaningful content that expanded the core experience.
Let's talk about classes. Battlefield always has distinct roles. How did they handle that for WWI?
They stuck to the core archetypes but adapted them. You had the assault class, your close quarters expert, good against infantry and vehicles using SMGs, shotguns, anti-tank grenades.
Okay, the frontline pusher.
Right. Then the medic, crucial for reviving teammates and healing, typically armed with semi-automatic rifles, essential for keeping the team fighting.
The backbone of the squad.
Then support, carrying light machine guns for suppressive fire, handing out ammo, repairing vehicles, and using mortars.
Oh, laying down the heavy fire.
And finally, the scout class. Your sniper, equipped with bolt-action rifles with scopes, but also vital for reconnaissance using spotting flares to reveal enemy positions on the minimap.
So, distinct roles encouraging teamwork. That sounds very Battlefield.
It is. But they added more layers. There were specific vehicle classes, tanker and pilot, who were weaker on foot but could spawn directly into vehicles and had abilities related to them, like repairing their tank from the inside.
And the cavalry class, too, for the horses.
Yeah, cavalry had unique perks like better defense while mounted and could drop health and ammo packs, a versatile, fast-moving role.
But the really interesting addition was the elite classes, right?
Ah, yes, the elite classes. These were game changers. They weren't classes you could choose at spawn. They were powerful kits you had to find and pick up on the battlefield itself.
Like power-ups.
Kind of, yeah. Finding one transformed you into a super soldier for one life. There was the Flame Trooper with a devastating flamethrower, perfect for clearing trenches. The Sentry, clad in heavy armor and wielding a massive machine gun or an experimental Villa Perosa SMG.
Sounds terrifying to run into.
Absolutely. There was the Tank Hunter with a huge anti-tank rifle, capable of damaging vehicles from afar. The Trench Raider focused on brutal melee combat with a club and grenades, and later DLC added the Infiltrator, who could call in artillery strikes.
So these kits became major objectives on the map. Control the elite spawn points.
Definitely. They added these dynamic focal points to the battle. Securing an elite kit for your team could significantly shift the balance of power, even if just temporarily. Made for some really intense fights over those pickup locations.
And speaking of shifting dynamics, the destruction. Battlefield is famous for it, but how did BF1 handle it?
They really brought back environmental destruction in a big way, even more so than in Battlefield 4, many felt. It wasn't just superficial damage, you could properly level buildings.
Level them completely.
Oh, yeah. Artillery shells would blast huge craters in the ground, changing the terrain. Houses, windmills, bunkers, they could be reduced to rubble. A sniper hiding in a church tower, bring it down. A machine gun nest in a house, blow the walls out.
That must have had a huge impact on gameplay. Cover is never permanent.
Exactly. It meant no two battles are ever the same, as they say. The map itself evolved during the match based on the destruction. You constantly had to adapt your tactics, find new cover, react to sightlines opening up or closing down. It made the battlefield feel alive and incredibly dynamic.
No hiding in the same spot forever.
Pretty much. And layered on top of that were those huge behemoths we mentioned, the train, the Zeppelin, the dreadnought. They weren't just powerful, they were massive, visually dominating set pieces that physically altered the flow of battle just by their presence, let alone their firepower.
It all sounds incredibly immersive. This combination of scale, destruction, unique modes, the behemoths, it really paints a picture of chaotic, high-stakes warfare.
How did elements like operations or even warp pigeons draw you, the player, into feeling like part of something bigger, something historical? I think it was that combination of structured objectives within this massive, chaotic sandbox. Operations gave you that narrative drive, that sense of a larger campaign, while the moment-to-moment gameplay with the destruction and unpredictable elements like behemoths made it feel incredibly visceral and consequential. Even War Pigeons, as quirky as it was, forced teamwork around a specific goal that felt, in its own way, part of the era's communication methods.
It's that blend of guided chaos, maybe. And a huge part of that immersion, that feeling of being there, must come down to the technical execution, the sights, and especially the sounds.
Oh, absolutely. And this is an area where Battlefield 1 wasn't just good, it was genuinely groundbreaking, especially the audio. You mentioned the awards earlier. Outstanding achievement in audio design at DICE, excellence in SFX at SXSW, that's serious recognition.
So what were they doing that was so special? What were the big audio innovations?
The team, led by audio director Bence Pajor and lead sound designers Andreas Almstrom and Mari Sustmoen and Minto, really pushed the boundaries. One key thing was their approach to dynamic range.
Dynamic range, like the difference between loud and quiet sounds.
Exactly. They moved to a more sophisticated stereo mix and developed what they called a dynamic mix system. Essentially, louder sounds could actively suppress or affect quieter sounds in the vicinity.
So like a huge explosion would drown out smaller sounds nearby.
Precisely. It allowed them to simulate the overwhelming nature of battlefield noise more realistically. Instead of just layering everything on top, the system prioritized the most impactful sounds, giving a greater perceived difference between, as they put it, a falling leaf to an atomic bomb. It helped maintain clarity amidst the chaos.
That makes sense. Prevents it from just becoming a wall of noise. What else?
Environmental acoustics were huge. Using the Frostbite engine, they implemented seamless crossfading between sound recordings captured at different distances and in varied environments.
Meaning, a rifle shot sounds different outdoors versus inside a bunker.
Not just different, but it transitions naturally as you move or as the sound source moves relative to you. They recorded sounds in forests, concrete rooms, open fields, etc., and the engine blended these recordings dynamically based on the game's geometry and your position. Made the world feel incredibly solid and acoustically real.
That level of detail is amazing. And weapon sounds themselves. They didn't just use repeating loops.
No, that was another big innovation. They called them gun and explosion synthesizers. They weren't purely synthesized, but built dynamically from chunks of real recordings, unique samples. The sound of a gunshot would shift based on distance, the environment's reverb, the firing angle, even the rate of fire.
So every burst of machine gun fire sounds slightly different.
Exactly. They never sounded like a looped sample of a gun. It added this incredible layer of realism and prevented audio fatigue from hearing the exact same sound effect hundreds of times.
You really start to appreciate the complexity behind something as seemingly simple as a gunshot sound. What about the ambient sounds, the general atmosphere?
They put a massive effort into that too. Mari Sustmoen and Minto talked about honing their process for ambient audio, creating distinct soundscapes for jungles, snowy mountains, deserts, ruined cities. Each environment had its own auditory character.
And weather effects. Rain, storms.
Well, there was a huge challenge, apparently requiring 4 times the usual amount of audio content. They had to capture the sound of rain hitting different surfaces, the rumble of thunder, the howling wind of a sandstorm, the eerie quiet of fog, and make it all react dynamically.
What was the goal with all this ambient detail?
Minto put it perfectly. Players should be able to close their eyes and feel you are really there. She even mentioned recording the sound of rain hitting her own coat hood to get that first-person perspective, that feeling of being inside the weather.
Wow, that's dedication. Baking in the sound of rain on your own head. And the vehicles must have been a huge undertaking, too.
Immense. They collaborated with Criterion Games, the studio famous for Burnout and Need for Speed, to get the sounds of the transport vehicles just right. Engine roars, gear shifts, tires on different surfaces.
Leveraging racing game expertise for WWI trucks.
Makes sense.
And then the behemoths, the 130-ton armored train, for example. They designed intricate layers of sound for it. The clank of coal being shoveled, the heavy chugging rhythm, the screech of brakes, loose couplings rattling.
We could almost feel the weight of it through the sound.
That was the idea. They even let players control the train whistle's pitch and intensity, giving you this direct, tactile connection to controlling this massive machine.
What about the weapons? Was it hard to get authentic recordings?
It presented challenges. Many WWI weapons are museum pieces now, fragile and sometimes unable to be fired, so they had to get creative. They focused on capturing the mechanical sounds, the bolt actions, the loading mechanisms very clearly. They conducted recording sessions in lots of different locations like Sweden, California, Idaho, to capture sounds in varied acoustic spaces.
Did they get everything they wanted?
Almost. They mentioned lamenting that they couldn't get their hands on a real, working flamethrower to record. But short of that, they went to incredible lengths. The dedication is palpable. Even down to explosions, not just a simple boom.
No way. They treated explosions as complex events. There's the initial blast concussion, yes, but also the sound of shrapnel flying past or hitting surfaces, the shockwave rolling through the environment, the unique echo or report, depending on the landscape, and the sound of debris, dirt, wood, metal raining down afterwards, all layered together to convey the power and destructive force.
It's like deconstructing reality into its audio components and rebuilding it in the game.
A pretty good way to put it. And for PC players, they even supported Dolby Atmos audio.
Ah, the surround sound with height channels.
Exactly. That added verticality to the soundscape. You could genuinely hear planes flying over you, artillery shells arcing above your trench. It added another dimension to situational awareness and immersion.
It's clear the audio was a monumental achievement. And visually, the game was no slouch either, was it?
Not at all. It was widely praised at launch as perhaps the most beautiful first-person shooter ever made. Even now, years later, you see people in the community saying BF1 is still graphically unmatched in terms of its aesthetic and atmosphere.
What specifically did people praise visually?
The way it captured the different environments, the thick sludge of the trenches, the cacophony of destruction on a chaotic battlefield, the stark beauty of desert standoffs, the dramatic mountain raids, the lighting, the textures, the particle effects, it all came together to create these incredibly evocative scenes.
And crucially, was it accessible? Or did you need a monster PC to run it?
That was another smart move by DICE. While it looks stunning, it was designed to run well on a moderate range of PCs. The minimum specs weren't crazy: an i5 processor, 8 gigs of RAM, a decent mid-range graphics card like a GTX 660 or Radeon HD 7850.
Well, a lot of people could actually experience this high-fidelity world.
Exactly. Making it accessible was key to its broad appeal and success. It wasn't just for the hardcore PC enthusiasts.
Thinking about all this meticulous detail, the dynamic audio, the stunning visuals, the destructible environments, how much does that enhance your sense of presence in that historical setting? Does it make you reflect more on the reality or just appreciate the technical craft? It certainly made me curious about how they pulled it off. But inevitably, all this effort runs into the big question: the reality check. Historical accuracy versus gameplay.
Ah, yes. The perennial debate with any historical game, but especially potent with Battlefield 1 given its WWI setting and its mainstream shooter mechanics.
Did the developers address this head-on?
They did, quite explicitly in fact. Daniel Berlin, a game designer on a project, stated very clearly that gameplay was the most important aspect. He said gameplay would not be slowed down due to the game's historical setting.
So, fun factor first.
Pretty much. He even acknowledged that they actively sacrificed historical accuracy to make the Great War fun. That's a direct admission. Gameplay trumped strict adherence to history when choices had to be made.
That's a bold statement, but honest. How did the player community react to that philosophy? Was it universally accepted?
Not universally, no. It sparked a lot of discussion, as you'd expect. There were threads, like one on Reddit titled, "Battlefield 1 is more historically accurate than you think," where players tried to reconcile the game with history.
What was the argument there? That it was accurate in some ways.
The core argument in that discussion was that the game specifically portrayed the late war period, particularly the offensives of 1918. This phase of the war did see more mobile tactics, more use of tanks and aircraft, and more aggressive infantry strategies compared to the earlier years of static trench warfare.
So they argued the game's focus was historically justifiable, just narrow.
Kind of. They pointed to the prevalence of 1918-era technology in the game. The tanks, the armored cars, certain weapons, as evidence that DICE was aiming for that specific, more dynamic period, rather than misrepresenting the entire war.
Okay, that's a nuanced take. But what about specific points of contention? Weaponry is usually a big one.
Definitely. The biggest criticism regarding weapons was the prevalence of automatic and semi-automatic firearms. Submachine guns, light machine guns, semi-auto rifles, even pump-action shotguns were quite common across the different classes in Battlefield 1.
And historically, that wasn't the case.
Not for the average soldier, no. While those types of weapons existed, especially later in the war, they were generally extremely rare or issued only to specialized assault troops, like the German stormtroopers. The standard infantryman on all sides was overwhelmingly equipped with a bolt-action rifle.
So the game significantly overrepresented automatic firepower for gameplay reasons. Faster-paced combat.
It certainly seems that way. Even scoped rifles for snipers, while they existed, Canadian units had scoped Ross rifles relatively early, were probably more common in the game than in reality. The overall ratio of machine guns to standard rifles was just way off compared to historical troop loadouts.
Okay, so weapon authenticity was definitely stretched for fun. What about vehicles? WWI tanks weren't exactly speed demons or indestructible fortresses.
Another major point of debate. Critics argued that the tanks in Battlefield 1 moved significantly faster, maybe 3 times as fast, and could absorb far more damage than their real-life counterparts.
What were real WWI tanks like?
Generally very slow, maybe 5 miles per hour on good terrain, prone to breaking down constantly, and vulnerable to artillery and even concentrated machine gun fire. In the game, they're much more agile, durable, and their cannons rotate way too fast compared to the slow, manually cranked turrets of the time.
So the look was right, but the performance was very gamified.
Exactly. The vehicles looked the part, very detailed models, but their performance characteristics were far more anachronistic. Again, clearly a choice favoring responsive, engaging vehicle gameplay, a Battlefield series staple over simulation-level realism.
Beyond these factual points about gear, there was also criticism about the game's overall feel, its aesthetic.
Yeah.
Some felt it didn't quite capture the WWI vibe.
Yeah, this gets more subjective, but it was a recurring comment. Some players felt that beyond the tanks and trenches, the game didn't fully immerse them in the atmosphere of WWI.
What specifically did they point to?
Things like the user interface, UI. It was criticized for feeling too modern techy, apparently reusing styles from the much more contemporary Battlefield 3 and BF4. The music, while good, didn't always feel distinctly period-appropriate to some ears.
And the character models.
That was another point. Some felt the soldiers looked too pristine and badass, almost like they were posing for a GQ fashion shoot, rather than looking like dirty and scare-drilled men stuck in horrific conditions.
So lack of grit, maybe? Too polished?
That was the sentiment for some. It led them to question the point of the WWI setting if the developers seemed to shy away from some of its grimmer, more unique aesthetic aspects. One comment summed it up. What really was the point of going with WW1 if they did everything possible to avoid the more interesting aspects of that war?
That's a harsh critique, but it raises a valid point about atmosphere versus assets. And there was also the issue of perspective in the campaign, wasn't there?
Right. PC World pointed out that all 6 of the war stories were told from the Allied perspective. There was no campaign content allowing you to play as soldiers from the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, etc.
So a somewhat one-sided view of the conflict in the single-player narrative.
Yes, which limited the potential for exploring the war from multiple angles, something the anthology format could otherwise have facilitated quite well.
So it all comes back to that balancing act, making a game historically grounded but also fun and accessible to a huge audience.
Exactly. Battlefield 1 clearly leaned towards being more of an arcade shooter, not a simulator. The focus was on dynamic action, random chaos with no direction of attack with run-and-gun mechanics, as some described it, rather than the meticulous, slower-paced realism you might find in games like Verdun or Red Orchestra 2, which explicitly aim for higher historical fidelity.
It's a fundamental choice developers have to make.
Yeah.
Where do you sit on that spectrum between arcade fun and hardcore simulation?
And Battlefield 1's massive success suggests their choice resonated with a very large audience, even if it didn't satisfy the purists.
That brings us to the question for you listening. Does this kind of historical flexibility bother you? Does it compromise the game's integrity? Or is it a necessary compromise to make a difficult historical period engaging and maybe even spark interest where none existed before? Where's your line between accuracy and fun? It's a really central question for historical gaming, and despite these debates, commercially and critically, Battlefield 1 was just a juggernaut.
An absolute monster, yeah. The sales figures were staggering right out of the gate. It was the best-selling retail game in the UK during its launch week, outselling the combined launch week sales of the previous two Battlefield games, BF4 and Hardline.
Wow, combined, that's huge.
It topped the US sales charts for October 2016 as well. And even in Japan, the PlayStation 4 version debuted at number 1, selling over 113,000 copies in its first week, which is significant for a Western shooter there.
So global domination, basically. Did EA expect this level of success?
They must have hoped, but the scale was impressive. They projected selling over 14 million copies in the game's first year. By April 2018, estimates suggest it had sold over 15 million copies worldwide.
15 million copies. What did that signal to the wider industry?
It sent a very clear message. Players were hungry for historical shooters again. Its sales dominance shows that fans are hungry for shooters based on historical wars, as one analyst put it. After years of futuristic settings, going back in time felt fresh and exciting, and the market responded emphatically.
So it potentially reversed the trend, or at least opened the door for more historical games.
I think it definitely did. It proved that a well-executed historical setting could be a massive draw, and its success stood in stark contrast to some other critically acclaimed shooters released around the same time, like Titanfall 2.
Right, Titanfall 2 reviewed well, but didn't sell nearly as much.
Exactly. And while there were multiple factors, Battlefield 1's unique historical hook was arguably a major differentiator that Titanfall 2's sci-fi setting, however well done, couldn't match in terms of broad market appeal at that moment. The timing and the setting choice were just perfect for Battlefield 1.
A real case of right game, right time, right setting.
Yeah.
And the critics loves it too, didn't they? It wasn't just sales.
No, the critical reception was overwhelmingly positive. It holds Metacritic scores in the high 80s, like 87 to 89 out of 100 across PC, PS4, and Xbox One. Consistently, generally favorable reviews.
What were the common themes of the praise?
Critics almost universally praised the unique, refreshing setting. The gameplay was described as savage and exciting. Many called it a landmark shooter, something that really stood out.
Any specific elements that got singled out?
The single-player war stories were often praised for their emotional impact and level design, even if some felt they were a bit short overall. Multiplayer mechanics were considered solid, and the new operations mode got a lot of specific acclaim. And, of course, the incredible visuals and sound design were almost universally highlighted as top-tier, best-in-class stuff.
And it picked up some significant awards too, beyond the audio ones we mentioned.
It did. It won Best Action Game at the prestigious Game Critics Awards at E3 2016, even before release based on demos. And it won the Audience Award at the Game Developers' Choice Awards in 2017, which shows strong player appreciation. Plus, numerous nominations across the board.
So a critical darling and a commercial behemoth, that's the dream combo.
Pretty much. And what's perhaps most telling is its enduring legacy. This wasn't just a flash in the pan.
People still play it actively today, don't they?
Oh yeah. Even years after release, Battlefield 1 maintains a dedicated player base, especially on PC. You regularly see comments from players calling it their favorite FPS experience ever, or saying that graphically and atmospherically, BF1 still remains unmatched.
That's incredible longevity for a multiplayer shooter. What do you think drives that loyalty?
Part of it is undoubtedly nostalgia. It holds significant nostalgic value for players who were there during its peak. But I think it's also a testament to the core gameplay loop, the unique atmosphere, and maybe the fact that no other game has quite captured that specific blend of WWI setting and large-scale battlefield chaos in the same way since.
You even see recent guides and community activity, like on Steam.
Exactly. People are still actively engaged, still figuring out its intricacies, still celebrating its strengths. It left a really lasting impression.
So considering this massive success commercially, critically, and with the community, despite all the debates about historical accuracy, what does that tell us? What's the takeaway about how interactive media engages with history?
It suggests, I think, that players are willing to engage with complex, even tragic historical periods through games, perhaps more so than the industry previously thought. And while strict accuracy might be debated, creating an immersive, evocative experience that feels authentic, even if it takes liberties, can be incredibly powerful and successful.
Maybe it's about sparking curiosity. Even if it's not perfectly accurate, It gets people interested in the history.
That's certainly part of the argument. It can serve as a gateway, prompting players to learn more about the real events and people. It recontextualizes the past, makes it feel immediate and relevant in a way a textbook might not.
Did Battlefield 1 leave a lasting impression on you personally? How did it change your view, if at all? It certainly made me think more about how we choose to remember and represent these events in popular culture. All right, so we've really covered a lot of ground here today. We've gone from DICE's bold, almost risky decision to set a blockbuster shooter in World War I.
Yeah, through those really quite moving war stories that tried to capture the human cost.
To the massive, chaotic, high-stakes multiplayer battles with operations and behemoths.
We touched on the incredible award-winning sound design and visuals that created that deep immersion.
And of course, we wrestled with those complex questions around historical accuracy versus gameplay fun.
It's been a fascinating journey through a game that clearly did more than just entertain. It sparked conversation, maybe even controversy, but undeniable engagement.
So the final thought to leave you with, maybe something to chew on. Battlefield 1 wasn't just a product, it ignited this global conversation. What does its phenomenal success ultimately signify for how we as a society engage with difficult history?
Especially when that history is presented as interactive entertainment. Does it help us remember? Does it reshape our memory? Does it risk simplifying things too much?
Where is that line? It's a really provocative question, I think. We'd genuinely love to hear your perspective on this. Did Battlefield 1 change how you saw World War I? Did it change how you see video games even?
Let us know your thoughts. Your experiences are part of this ongoing conversation. Thanks for joining us on the Dev Dive.